Fame is often seen as the ultimate escape, the shimmering reward for years of struggle, the golden key to a life most can only dream of. But behind that bright, glittering curtain of red carpets and flashing cameras, lies something darker. Something that reminds us that no matter how adored, how talented, or how powerful someone becomes, the human mind can still fracture, twist, and collapse under its own weight. Tonight, we step into that darkness. These aren't ghost stories. They're real. And they prove that sometimes, the most chilling monsters aren't hiding under our beds. They're the ones we once idolized. This is 5 disturbing celebrity cases that shook the world. O.J. Simpson was once the embodiment of the American dream. A record-breaking NFL legend, a charismatic actor, a symbol of success, confidence, and charm. But in the summer of 1994, all of that shattered. When the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were found brutally murdered outside Nicole's Brentwood home, the world stopped. The images from that case have become iconic. The white Ford Bronco speeding down the Los Angeles freeway, helicopters circling overhead, millions glued to their televisions, watching what felt less like a crime story and more like the unraveling of an American icon. It wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about race, power, fame, and how far the justice system would bend under the glare of celebrity. The prosecution's evidence was damning: blood, DNA, a glove found at the scene. But the defense turned the trial into a cultural battlefield. And when O.J. slipped on the infamous glove in court, and it didn't fit, the momentum shifted. The defense hammered their line into history. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. When the verdict came, not guilty, the country erupted. Some cheered. Others were horrified. It wasn't just a man walking free. It was America's reflection staring back at itself, a reflection stained with violence, race, and media obsession. But the real horror lies not in the courtroom drama. It lies in the silence that followed. The fact that 2 people were brutally murdered, and no one was ever convicted. O.J. went on to live, to laugh, to give interviews with chilling ease. Years later, he would be arrested again, this time for armed robbery in Las Vegas, almost as if fate demanded balance. And when he was finally released, the world had changed. But his smile hadn't. It still carried that same eerie calm, as if the ghosts of Brentwood never existed. And maybe that's the most disturbing part of all. Phil Spector was a genius. There's no denying that. The man who built the wall of sound, who shaped the sound of the 60s, and who turned artists into legends. But behind the creative brilliance lay a darkness that had been whispered about for years. A temper, a fascination with guns, and a dangerous obsession with control. On a February night in 2003, that darkness finally consumed him. Actress Lana Clarkson was found dead in the foyer of Spector's mansion, a gunshot wound through her mouth. Phil claimed it was an accident. He said she kissed the gun. But investigators found blood spatter patterns, gun residue, and a chilling history of women who had escaped his home terrified, telling eerily similar stories, how he'd threatened them with guns when they tried to leave. For decades, Spector's power and money had shielded him. His eccentricity was romanticized as artistic madness. But when the trial began, the mask fell apart. His wigs, his bizarre courtroom behavior, his strange smiles. It was like watching a man dissolve under the weight of his own delusions. The jury saw through it. In 2009, Phil Spector was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 19 years to life. He died behind bars in 2021, his legacy forever split in two. Half of it, pure musical genius. The other half, a symbol of how the industry's tolerance for eccentric brilliance can allow a predator to thrive unchecked. The sound he created once filled stadiums, wedding halls, and movie screens. But in the end, the only sound left was that of a single gunshot echoing in a lonely mansion, the sound that exposed the monster behind the music. This story is not just disturbing, it's almost unbearable. Chris Benoit wasn't just a wrestler. He was the wrestler, respected, disciplined, and loved by millions. But what happened in June 2007 remains one of the darkest moments in sports history. Police were called to Benoit's home in Fayetteville, Georgia. Inside, they discovered a nightmare. His wife, Nancy, strangled. His 7-year-old son, Daniel, suffocated. And Chris himself, hanging from a weight machine in the basement. At first, the news outlets couldn't comprehend it. A technical error, perhaps? A break-in gone wrong? But as details emerged, a grim picture formed. Investigators pieced together a timeline. Chris had killed his wife, then his son, then spent hours alone in that house before taking his own life. The crime scene was hauntingly meticulous. Bibles placed beside the bodies, locks engaged, messages sent. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was methodical. When autopsy results revealed massive brain damage from years of repeated head trauma, the condition known as CT, the conversation shifted. Was Benoit a murderer? A victim of the brutal world of professional wrestling? Or both? The WWE erased his name from history. No mentions, no tributes, no images. It was as if he never existed. But his story continues to haunt every conversation about mental health and physical trauma in sports. Because somewhere between the cheers of the arena and the silence of that house, something snapped, something that no one saw coming. And that silence still lingers, echoing louder than any crowd ever could. Oscar Pistorius was the embodiment of inspiration, a double amputee who defied the impossible, running alongside the fastest men alive. He wasn't just an athlete. He was hope made human. But behind that polished image lay insecurity, paranoia, and an explosive temper. On Valentine's Day 2013, Pistorius claimed he mistook his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp, for an intruder. He fired 4 shots through a locked bathroom door. Riva died almost instantly. The story fractured the world. Some saw it as a tragic accident, the panicked act of a man living in a country haunted by crime. Others saw it as a deliberate act of rage, fueled by jealousy and control. In court, Pistorius broke down, sobbed uncontrollably, and retold the events over and over. But the physical evidence contradicted his story. Neighbors heard screams. The bullet trajectory suggested aim, not panic. The man once hailed as the Blade Runner became a symbol of how fragile heroism really is. He was convicted, then reconvicted, as appeals dragged on for years. Each retrial stripped away another layer of the man who once inspired millions. By the time the final verdict was read, guilty of murder, his fame had decayed into infamy. The image of Pistorius crying in the courtroom remains etched into the collective memory, not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a mirror to fame's cruel truth. Even the brightest flames cast the darkest shadows. Robert Blake had the kind of face that Hollywood loved, rugged, intense, full of emotion. He'd starred in classics, won awards, and walked the red carpet for decades. But on a spring night in 2001, his life turned into something straight out of a war film, one that he, chillingly, might have written himself. Blake and his wife, Bonnie Lee Backley, had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Studio City. Afterward, Blake claimed he went back inside to retrieve a gun he'd left at the table. When he returned, Bonnie was slumped in the car, shot in the head. The story was too strange to believe, too cinematic to be real. Prosecutors said Blake had been trying to find someone to kill his wife for months. The defense said he was a loving husband caught in a nightmare. The trial became a Hollywood circus, cameras flashing, tabloids feeding. And then, against all odds, Blake was acquitted. Not because the story made sense, but because the evidence didn't. There were holes, inconsistencies, and a lack of direct proof. Yet the civil court later found him liable for her wrongful death, ordering him to pay millions. He declared bankruptcy. His career evaporated. He died years later, living quietly, forgotten by the sane world that once worshipped him. The irony is haunting. A man who made a career out of pretending to kill on screen ultimately became defined by a killing that no one could ever fully explain. These stories aren't about fame. They're about what fame does to people. Each of these names once stood for brilliance, achievement, and admiration. But when the lights dimmed, what was left wasn't just loneliness or stress. It was the terrifying realization that behind every perfect smile, there can lurk something broken. Fame doesn't heal wounds. It hides them. It amplifies them. And sometimes, it gives them the power to destroy everything around them. The faces we see on magazine covers and movie posters aren't gods. They're human, fragile, flawed, and often one bad decision away from darkness. The world may never forget their crimes, but it will never fully understand them either. Because the scariest part about these cases isn't what they did. It's that they looked so normal before they did it. When we celebrate the famous, we often forget the spotlight doesn't just illuminate success. It exposes the cracks too. And if you stare long enough into that light, you start to see the shadows.